All right, great. So I'm going to share my screen. I always have slides. You guys know that. I'm a prolific slide maker. And one time I got an award from my staff for the person who probably has made the most slides in the history of the United States. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do have a lot of slides. All right. So the topic for today is why is it so hard to lose weight? And I just want to start my talk by saying that I used to be 50 pounds heavier than I am right now. And I totally forgot about it because I've been in this body for so long that I haven't thought. I mean, I think about weight because I deal with so many clients and members who have weight problems, but I don't think about myself as ever having had a weight problem. And then my high school reunion, 50th high school reunion was last year. And I was out of town and I didn't get to go, but a couple of people contacted me who I had been friendly with back then. And one of them sent me a picture. I had visited her in Florida when I was in my probably late 20s. And there I was in my fat body. And I thought, oh my gosh, I really was fat. And I tried every diet in the world. I tried starving myself, liquid diets, everything but what works, you know. So, but at the end of the day, as soon as I happened on plant-based nutrition and Dr. McDougall, some of you familiar with Dr. McDougall, who used to speak at this conference, who died last year, unfortunately. But I, came across his material. I adopted the McDougall diet, and the weight came off, and I never thought about it again. So, we all are victims of our own experience. And my experience was that when I found the right way to do it, I lost the weight. I've never looked back. I don't gain weight. I don't lose weight, just kind of stay like this. But when I deal with other people, it is very difficult. And so we taught people how to eat our diet. We have extensive educational programs. And I have to say that for a significant percentage of particularly obese people, we've been completely unsuccessful until about a year and a half ago. And that's when I started looking into this. I'm a great researcher. It's what I'm known for. And I thought there has to be a solution to this problem. And it probably has something to do with the whole history of weight loss and all that sort of thing. So that's what I'm going to share with you. I started looking into this and giving it a lot of thought and trying some different things. And I'm going to tell you what we have been doing that works. It works almost all the time for people who want to lose weight. And I have to say this, there are people who talk about wanting to do things, not just weight, but you guys probably know people like this. I want to start a business, and then 15 years later, they haven't started a business. I really want to move, and then 15 years later, they still haven't moved. So people talk about things that they want to do all the time and they don't do them. And it's no different with weight. People talk about losing weight and they often don't do anything about it for a long time. But if somebody shows up as a member of Wellness Forum and they really want to lose weight, we do have a program that works. So I'm going to share a lot of this with you. So I'll start with this quote. Dieting seems to make people fatter. And this came from one of our longtime members. I'm really successful at weight loss. I've lost 1,000 pounds. The problem is I gained back 1,200. And that says it all. This person was expressing what really happened. And as I think about the people we've worked with over the years, the more they diet, the more they lose weight and then gain back more. And at the end of 20 or 30 years of dieting, they're actually in worse shape than they were before they ever did the first diet. And it's not limited to the United States. About 2 billion people, or 30% of the world's population, are overweight or obese. And for many of those people, dieting's become a way of life. The weight goes up, the weight goes down, and then it comes back again. Each time they lose weight, they regain the weight they lost and then some. And so hundreds of millions of people have dieted and are dieting themselves to fatness. Now, some people say it's genetics, but it's impossible for genetics to explain such a rapid increase in the prevalence of overweight and obese people. And there's no end to the other theories that people come up with because there's so much money to be made in offering a solution for people who are desperate to lose weight. Now, to tell you the size of the market, according to a Gallup poll last year, 55% of American adults say they want to lose weight, 61% of women, 48% of men, but only 27% report that they're trying to lose it. And I think the reason is that people cycle in and out of diets. And at a certain point in time, they sometimes just give up and say, I've tried everything. nothing works. So maybe I'll just get used to being this size. And by the way, we'll come back to that. But we all become familiar with things, including negative things. And familiarity is a dangerous thing. Like if you're familiar with health promoting habits and you keep them, that's great. If you're familiar with being careful about money and saving money, that's great. But if you're familiar with being a certain size that's maybe 100 pounds bigger than you should be, being familiar with that is not so good, but we get comfortable with where we are. And even when it's not good for us, we sometimes are very reluctant to change. Now, obesity is not a new problem, only the prevalence has changed. In fact, there are obese people featured in Stone Age drawings, and there were cases of obesity included in writings during the Roman Empire. Hippocrates, and that was a long time ago, warned about the health risks associated with obesity and stated that it led to premature death. And this is a quote: "It is very injurious to health to take in more food than the constitution will bear, when at the same time one uses no exercise to carry off the excess." So this goes to, and I'm going to come back to this, people think that the problem is seed oils and processed foods, and those things may be a problem. We can talk about that later, but there were no seed oils and processed foods when Hippocrates was around. There were just people who ate too much, and they seemed to have a lot of trouble taking it off even then. Weight loss plans are also not new. Hippocratic texts where you get recommended diet, drugs, believe it or not, running during the night, walking in the early morning, wrestling, baths, massage, rest, and appropriate lifestyle habits. Sleep apnea was noted as a side effect of obesity by the ancient Greeks, who prepared very long, thin needles and pushed them through the hips and belly of Greek statesman Dionysius while he was sleeping, supposedly to relieve airway pressure. That sounds pretty drastic. It kind of makes today's starvation diets look a little mild by comparison, right? Some of the earliest weight loss drugs were emetics and cathartics like bindweed juice and sea splurge. And then laxatives were made of donkey milk mixed with honey, wild parsley, thyme, or sweet wine, and those were used for quick weight loss. So I remember my mother used to take diuretics, and she always was doing some kind of crazy weight loss thing. I'm sure she probably tried some of this kind of stuff too. In 11th century England, William the Conqueror became so fat that his horses couldn't carry him anymore. So he decided to adopt a really interesting diet. He informed his staff that he would stay in bed and drink only alcohol until he lost weight. Later that year, he resumed writing and he died after a fall from his horse. And he didn't lose much weight on the all alcohol diet. It's reported that he had to be squeezed into his casket for burial. So some people watching this might say, wow, you can drink alcohol and lose weight. That's an interesting idea, except it doesn't work. In the 1700s, Scottish physician George Shane's weight loss advice included exercise, fresh air, eating vegetables, and the waters of Bath. Most likely, the first high protein, low carbohydrate diet was recommended by Army Doctor John Rollo and Royal Undertaker William Banting in England. So you see, there's nothing new. Exercise and eat good food. No, it's high protein, low carbohydrate. It's been going on for centuries and centuries and a long time. We had an interesting story here. The president of the United States, William Howard Taft, was obese. He was the most obese person ever to serve as president of our country. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, and his weight got as high as 350 pounds. And he got a lot of criticism for that. And I would agree. I mean, the leader of our country we'd love to have that person reflect good habits, but he also was the subject of a lot of humiliation from political cartoonists. He might have been the first yo-yo dieter. And he ended up working with this guy, Dr. Nathaniel E. York Davies, who advised him to lose between 60 and 80 pounds by eating meals at specific times and weighing all of his food. So it was probably the first, controlled diet, like what you would see with frozen dinners at the grocery store, that sort of thing. He was told to eat lean meat or fish at every meal. He could have cooked vegetables at lunch and dinner, eat plain salads and baked fruit, and he was allowed 1 glass of wine at lunch. I'm not so sure I'm happy about the president of the United States having wine at lunch every day, because I know that my judgment and my mental acuity are not so great after wine. But anyway, that was the diet plan. The doctor developed his own diet product, which was gluten-free biscuits, which he had shipped to the United States for Taft. And he told Taft, if you eat these biscuits, it'll help you lose weight. So you can see the silly promises aren't different either. It was just different people making them at that time. Well, Taft did lose 60 pounds within the first 6 months, but he said he was hungry all the time. By the time of his inauguration in 1909, he'd regained all of his weight and then some. And he actually, this is so embarrassing, he got stuck in a White House bathtub. And of course, political commentators and news reporters started making fun of him a lot. He lost and regained weight throughout the rest of his life, and he did keep some of it off. When he died, he weighed only 280 pounds, which was down from his high of 350. So apparently, famous people, even people that have people preparing their meals and that sort of thing, they suffer from the same problem and they try all the same crazy stuff as the rest of us have tried. Now, this is for some comic relief here. Fletcherizing was introduced by Horace Fletcher in the late 1800s, and it involved chewing food until it was liquefied. By the way, Fletcher wasn't a doctor or a nutritionist, but he did instruct people to chew their food at least 100 and as many as 700 times before swallowing it. And he even said that liquids should be chewed, which really meant just kind of swirling them around in your mouth because you could extract more nutrients and reduce calorie intake. So the bizarre part is, if that's not bizarre enough, he claimed that a person using his method would be able to live on half the food that would normally be required. And that would result in saving money. A family of four, for example, could save enough money to furnish a 5-room flat in just 15 months with his method. And he predicted that if all Americans could be convinced to do this, the United States would save a collective $500,000 per day. Now, as attractive as this sounds, it was never widely adopted. But he was, however, taken pretty seriously. A lot of famous people were taking up the practice and talking about it, like Franz Kafka, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and John D. Rockefeller. One senator from Oklahoma even wrote a proclamation urging the US government to recognize Fletcherism. Dr. Ernest von Sumeren presented a paper to the British Medical Association and the International Congress of Physiology on Fletcherism. But as you might imagine, eventually interest in this method of eating eventually went away. It did slow down eating. I guess that's the best you can say for it, but it was impractical, it was unsustainable. And I think that's pretty much the way most weight loss programs are. And again, not new, been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, in the early 20th century, American Tobacco Company launched an advertising campaign promoting the smoking of Lucky Strike cigarettes for weight loss. And they even had a campaign slogan, reach for a lucky instead of a sweet. Lucky Strike, reach for a lucky instead of a sweet. At the time, cigarette smoking was recommended by many doctors, and cigarette ads appeared in medical journals. And I remember a good friend of mine who used to practice in New York, who died a few years ago. He was considerably older than I am, but he said, yes, the way it used to work is we would examine the patient, and then we would take the patient into our office, and the patient and I would light up a cigarette and smoke and discuss the findings of the physical examination. So it's kind of hard to imagine that today, but cigarettes were promoted as a way to lose weight. And one of the reasons I used to smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day, by the way. Everything I do to excess, seems to be my habit. But anyway, one of the reasons I smoked so much was I thought it would make me thin. But the interesting thing was I was a fat smoker, so that wasn't working at all for me. Liquid diets. The first liquid diet that really gained a lot of traction, aside from the Fletcherizing, which is you make your food liquid from chewing it so much, was Dr. Stoll's Diet Aid. It was mainly sold in beauty salons starting in the 1930s. It was made of a teaspoon of milk chocolate combined with starch, whole wheat, and bran blended with 1 cup of water. And dieters were instructed to drink it for breakfast and lunch. So what it really was extreme calorie restriction. And like we see today, extreme calorie restriction results in fast weight loss in the beginning, but not much long-term success. But what Dr. Stoll's product did was it paved the way for today's multi-billion-dollar liquid meal replacement industry. And if you go online, and I do this once in a while just to see what's out there, you could scroll products till the end of days and you wouldn't run out of things to look at. This is still a very popular way to lose weight. Weight Watchers, I know you've all heard of, and it actually started out pretty good, in my opinion. It was in the 1960s. A housewife in New York realized that she needed support to maintain her own weight loss. So over 400 people showed up at her first meeting. Other overweight people were looking for support also. Millions of people all over the world have participated in Weight Watchers classes and support groups and summer camps and purchased foods and the magazines and the journals and subscribe to the apps and that sort of thing. A lot of attention got paid to Weight Watchers when billionaire Oprah Winfrey became a major investor and spokesperson. Today, unfortunately, both Weight Watchers and Oprah Winfrey advocate for the GLP-1 inhibitors and other weight loss drugs, which is probably going to create a bigger problem in our country than the opiate crisis did for a lot of reasons we can talk about a little bit later. So I was sorry to see Weight Watchers go this direction, because one of the things that Weight Watchers did focus on, and I knew some people who led groups and had experience with the organization, was keeping people accountable and connected. And I do think that that's really important. And now there's accountability and connection for taking the drugs, and that's unfortunate, in my opinion. So what we have is hundreds of years of diet plans: the tapeworm diet, the Scarsdale diet, the cabbage soup diet. My mother did the cabbage soup diet, by the way, I remember that. And then drugs like Dexatrim and appetite suppressants and exercise programs. And what they all have in common is almost anything works for some people. Most of the things that work don't work for most people. And even when somebody has success, it's generally quite temporary. So yo-yo dieting is the rule, not the exception. And people move from strategy to strategy to strategy, looking for some novel idea. And this is part of the problem. We've come to think in the area of health that instead of common sense, that there's some magical thing that somebody discovers, some substance or some method of eating or the hours that you eat or whatever, that's going to fix all these problems. And it doesn't. It just doesn't. And we'll be talking about that in just a bit. Now, here's why we have to do something about it, in my opinion, is that people who are overweight and obese are miserable. And it starts early. By age 3, many kids do the same things that adults do. They stigmatize overweight or obese children. And we have an awful lot of overweight or obese children. We were just talking in the breakout room before I came into the main session here about children need parents, and parents should be deciding what kids eat and doing something about this. And we have a lot of kids who are put in a situation to select what they want to eat, even at really early ages, and they eat themselves into obesity. But the longer the child remains overweight, the higher the risk of psychiatric disorders like conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, substance abuse, depression, anxiety. Obese children do not think well of themselves. They describe themselves as having less athletic competence, which is true. They tend to have a negative view of their appearance and self-worth. And I thought this was one of the saddest things I ever saw, that severely obese children and adolescents rate their quality of life as being similar to that of children diagnosed with cancer. So we have to do something about this. This can't be allowed to persist. And parents need to address this issue for their kids, because kids can't fix this on their own. Obese adolescents are even more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety, to have social problems, and to withdraw socially than normal weight kids. One of the reasons for social withdrawal is overweight kids are less likely to be selected by their peers to be friends as compared to their normal weight counterparts. And then the opinions and attitudes of others are disturbing. Like 28% of teachers report that becoming obese is the worst thing that can happen to someone. 24% of nurses state that they're repulsed by obese people. And so while I make a very strong argument for we should do something about the problem, I make an argument that we should get rid of all judgment. People don't, most of the time anyway, deliberately